Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Denise Carey Show. As always, it is a great honor and a great privilege to have Major General Paul Vallely on the broadcast. This is a man who retired as Deputy Commanding General for the Pacific Command. Again, a U.S. Army Major General. He was a former senior military analyst for the Fox News Network. He is a co-author with Thomas McInerney, the Lieutenant General from the Air Force. They wrote a book called The Endgame, Blueprint for Victory in the War on Terror. I recommend everybody buy it on Amazon.com. He's also very much involved in Stand Up America US. And this is a fabulous website. Check it out. There's important articles that you can find out and read about each and every day. Major General Vallely, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you, Denise. Happy to be back with you again.
Well, I'm happy to have you, and I want to start off today with getting your thoughts. I want the American people to hear your take on the United Kingdom's Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. He said, quote, "I think that the practice of automatic early release." Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about a guy by the name of Usman Khan. This is a 28-year-old. His family immigrated from Pakistan. He was involved in terrorism before. He was arrested 8 years ago and sentenced for 16 years of prison time for having been involved in planning terrorist attacks in the United Kingdom, in England. And, you know, Major General Paul Vallely, I couldn't believe that his sentence was cut in half and he was released after 8 years. And of course, he goes out and murders 2 people. But I want to finish reading what Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, said. I want to get your take on it. He said, Boris Johnson, early release where you cut a sentence in half and let really serious violent offenders out early simply isn't working, and you have some very good evidence on how it's not working, and I'm afraid this is the case. Did you put that up on the screen? Okay, great. So that's up on the screen. Paul, what really disturbs me is that the Prime Minister of England says, you know what, if you have really serious violent offenders, gosh, you might not want to cut their sentence in half. Why doesn't he just come out and call this Khan an Islamic terrorist? What is it all about? Is it all about political correctness, sir?
They want to be politically correct, just like in the United States. You know, we don't challenge the Council of American and Islamic Relations, CARE, for example. And so we're very lenient in the media. And, of course, you can't use any kind of language at all to ever smear Islam. But Islam goes back so far, radical Islam, which has grown and developed in England ever since the late 40s, when they started bringing in the Pakistanis. And when they call it Londonistan, it's really a takeoff on Pakistan, or what they call Pakis, P-A-K-I-S. So they're going to have to come to the forefront here if they want to protect their country about radical Islamists.
I really think they need to come to terms with it, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to speak to this, sir, because this Usman Khan, being from Pakistan, he openly talked about setting up a terrorist training camp in Kashmir. And for those of you that don't know about the civil war going on in Kashmir, the Muslims are continually attacking people inside India and attacking the country of India because it has controlled Kashmir. Paul, you know all about the land giveaway under Mahatma Gandhi. I mean, India has already given away an entire region that is called Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan was part of India once upon a time, and I think it was, 1948? That India literally gave to the Muslims this whole region called Pakistan, but it doesn't seem like they're satisfied with it, sir. Your thoughts?
Well, no, I mean, it's all part of the Islamic trend to expand the Caliphate really Muslim lands wherever they can. You've seen what they try to do with ISIS in Syria and Iraq and the Middle East.
Yes.
You've had the same thing occurring in the Philippines, for example. And now we see what's happened in the European countries, especially with the lenient migration into these countries from the Middle East that have been implanted, for example, with a lot of radical Islamists. And then they've developed the NoGo zones, the green zones, in many of these cities in Europe where they don't merge with the local population culturally. And so therefore you have, again, I've been in a no-go zone outside of Paris, so I can tell you what that's like. But so this is the expansion for radical Islam. This is their plan. If anybody reads The Traveler, they can certainly gather the information from that exercise there that they've produced, because they tell you what they're going to do, and they do it.
Right. You know what? I think that's interesting that you brought up no-go zones. I know Daniel Pipes, a Middle East expert as well, has talked about no-go zones. The president, let's pivot
in fact, I was with Daniel in one in Paris.
Well, I understand there are several in England.
Yes.
And it's gotten to the point.
In Birmingham, there's a big one.
What deeply disturbs me is that the civilian population in England, literally people have been arrested for trying to talk publicly and openly about the threat of Islamic terrorism there in England. I thought that was incredible that there were so many rapes in places like Birmingham in England, that they had Muslim gangs that were literally grooming these young girls walking home from school and taking them, kidnapping them, preparing them to be raped by these Muslim gangs because of the scripture or the texts within the Quran, which actually speak literally to the right of a Muslim man to be able to use an infidel as a sex slave partner. Are you aware of that, sir?
Oh, absolutely. In the Quran, they interpret that. But, we're talking about a minority of Muslims
sure.
that, are guilty of this. But if you take 1+ billion, and you just take a small 20%, which are considered radicals, that's still 300 million people.
It concerns me, though. It concerns me that I had a Muslim student in my own class go to the administration where I'm an educator and basically say to use the term Islamic terrorism was deeply offensive to her. Now, I don't consider her radical at all. And I was surprised that it would offend her. Your thoughts on Muslims that are not radical, but making it very difficult to just enjoy freedom of speech in America. Do you see that as a concern, sir?
It's a very concern, and we've studied it. But what you have to understand is, if you're an Islamist, that means you follow the Quran. Now, they've radicalized a portion to call them radical Islamists because they conduct terrorism.
Right.
But if you follow the Quran and you follow Sharia, you're an Islamist. And that means you don't believe in democracy. You believe that Allah rules. And so therefore, when you look at the Quran, 80% of it is not religious at all. It's financial. It's how to control
civil
society.
Law. It's civil law.
What you do with the infidels. So people need to really understand what the Quran says. But they've taken the Quran with the radicalization of it and the radicalization of the Islamists, those that believe in Sharia. That's why you cannot permit Sharia in the United States or any democratic country, because it's not compatible with democracy of a free and open society.
But exactly. But what concerns me is that non-radical Muslims are making it difficult to just be able to have a conversation or simply to make a passing statement. In my case, in an institution of an educational institution, just to say the word Islamic terrorism brought down the entire administration on my head. I don't know. That deeply concerns me. I worry.
They're afraid of retribution. They are afraid what the moderate or even radical Muslims will say in their communities. And so that's the threat they have on the entire Muslim societies, wherever they are. And so they'll stand up and support it because they don't want to be labeled as somebody that's anti-Sharia or anti the Quran and what it preaches. And that's what it boils down to. Same thing on the campuses.
It's terrible. It's terrible on my campus. It's terrible on campuses. And this lack of the ability to have freedom of speech is deeply disturbing to me. And yet, people that are anti-Semitic and hate Israel, they're out there in front of the cameras and in front of the administrators at universities and colleges and high schools, and they're quoting the Quran, and they're basically saying very hateful and dangerous, violent things against the Jewish population, and that's okay. But
it's okay for them to
disrupt.
Be bombastic against the Jews and Westerners
and Christians
and Catholics and Christians.
Right.
But boy, you dare not say anything about them in the United States, in many areas, like on college campuses, or inside London, for example, or inside Paris. It's a no-no. So why do we give them special treatment when it's the violence that is being spread by the radicals? And that's where people have to stand up and say, we're not going to take this any longer. This is our country. We do not want Sharia. We want democracy. And we don't all abide by Allah Akbar, and we want to go to the great kingdom of Allah. So, I mean, that's it. But only 20% of the Quran really focuses on any kind of religion. People don't understand that.
People don't understand that, and they don't understand that there are so many texts within the Quran, as well as the Hadith, which, ladies and gentlemen, is a compilation of several books that complement the Quran, that, call for things like the crucifixion or the burning or the decapitating or the hand cutting and the foot cutting of infidels. And I don't think people understand that, they want to say, well, that's fake Islam. But literally, I think that it's hardly fake Islam. But, to say that as well seems to get you in trouble when people that are quoting the Quran are literally, I think, the truest of believers and very devout and taking the Quran literally. It's deeply concerning, and I worry that their numbers are growing. I remember when Bibi, a young woman who was a Christian, was locked in prison in a dungeon in Pakistan for years. And it wasn't a small minority that went after her when they found out she was released. It was whole communities that went after her. But anyway, I'm concerned about a growing radicalization. I guess that's my concern. Not only here, but in Europe.
Here's a fact, Denise. We tried to tell the Bush administration and teach them about the Middle East, about Islam, the Quran. They wouldn't listen.
Right.
They thought this was just a war against terrorism. That's why they called it that. Mm-hmm. We sent some very, very senior educated people in Islam, like Claire Lopez and others,
yes,
into the Pentagon, mm-hmm, into the State Department, but they didn't want to be educated. And still, we deal with that today. Trump is still dealing with people in the State Department, CIA, which still don't understand that we should have never gone into what they call the Muslim lands. That's why it was a bad mistake by Bush going into Iraq. It was a totally unnecessary war.
Special forces maybe could have handled that one.
Well, yeah, they could have, but they weren't a threat to the United States.
Well, I'm thinking, I want to say something, to President Trump's great credit. I thought it was fabulous that he talked about vetting people coming from Muslim countries, because I don't think people realize that even when you're talking to a moderate Muslim, that maybe it has no thought of ever being radicalized. They're nonviolent, absolutely 100%. I have friends that are Muslims. So
sure,
they're not.
I do too.
Yeah, I have friends that are Muslims, and they're not thinking about terrorism. The problem is when they try to shut down free speech about maybe the growth of Islamic terrorism or the growth of anti-Semitism here in America as a result, and literally tied to the fact that we've had so many refugees come from Muslim countries that are then on our campuses and growing anti-Semitism in America through their propaganda. I think we have to look at the big picture, and radical Islam is one threat, terrorism is one threat, but I give such credit to President Trump for really wanting to vet people and wanting to slow the immigration, because I also think about the FBI, don't you? I mean, I think about all of the genital mutilation that goes on. Female genital mutilation is a real problem. And
sex trafficking.
Sex trafficking, drugs.
Oh, you just got so many. But we're still feeling in the deep state,
yes.
Denise, with these people that don't want to learn. I've spent so much time in the Middle East, inside Syria, inside southern Turkey, which is basically Islamist, yes. Iraq, Kuwait. Mm-hmm. And it's so frustrating that when you go over there and look back, and then you look at the officials we've had in the State Department, FBI, CIA, in the White House, that were there before Trump, and some of them are still there. They're still around, that have never had the ability to go and understand what radical Islam is. And like the president of Egypt told me, General al-Sisi, says, well, Islam is Islam. And when you think about how they look at it, Islam is Islam. We call it radical Islam, but really what they are a bunch of crazy people who want to use the Quran and Islam to their advantage to advance the Caliphate and to control governments, controlled areas where there'll be no borders. It'll be a gigantic world of Islam. And that's the way they look at it. And they're willing to die for it and go to Allah early, as I say. That's a big problem. You
make an excellent point, and I think that goes to my point. You know, you talked about Islamic terrorists being a minority, but their ranks are growing, and I think about, since you mentioned Egypt, real quick, I just wanted to add, half of the Egyptian population voted for a Muslim Brotherhood that supports kidnapping Christians and forced conversions. Thank you. And, you know, so I'm really concerned that the spread is growing. If you've got half the population of Egypt supporting an Islamist by the name of Mohammed Morsi, who supported terrorism and the destruction of the state of Israel.
But it was really, it was a small, there wasn't even 50% that supported him.
I read it was pretty...
At the time, it's somewhere around there, but after they found out, because Muslim Brotherhood started in Egypt in 1924.
Right, exactly.
And Egypt threw them out, and they went up to Mecca and Medina. And set up their bases inside Saudi Arabia. But General al-Sisi's allowed Christians to come back. They've rebuilt the Christian churches now, so it's a different situation.
Well, they're trying.
And glad they got rid of Morsi and the brother. But yet Obama and Clinton and the Careys, they supported Morsi.
Well, the Muslim Brotherhood is still very active. I still talk to Coptic.
No doubt about it.
They're very active in Egypt, but we still got Coptic Christians running here. Anyway, we've got to run real quick just before we close. I wanted to get your thoughts, sir, on Vindman. Now, this person. Let's talk about Alex Vindman for just a moment. He's a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. He's serving an assignment for the National Security Council. He dresses up in a suit every day and goes to work. And am I being too picky to ask you the question, is it a bit disingenuous for him to show up in full military uniform as a lieutenant colonel who is not actively serving as a lieutenant colonel, but is involved as an NSC director for European affairs? I wanted to get your thought on that as a former major general of the U.S. Army.
Well, totally disingenuous, because he's on loan from the Army to the National Security Staff, and they work out of the Executive Office building. And certainly they were civilian attire in that job. It was inappropriate from him to go and flash his medals and his uniform when he was an anti-Trumper. He had worked behind the scenes, as we saw in his testimony.
Mm-hmm.
One of those guys that should have been pulled immediately out of the National Security Council for not supporting his president, commander-in-chief, and he should have been relieved and taken out of the Army. I would have done that. But we have PC generals still and admirals that won't take those kinds of actions, and that's another problem.
You know, I want to call your attention. I think I sent you an article from the Federalist, and it talked about how Alex Vindman, was asked 3 times by the Ukrainian government to act as the defense minister of Ukraine. I would have thought at that point, as soon as the Democrats heard that, you know, we've got a guy sitting in front of us that's working for the NSC,
right,
but he's so close to the Ukrainian government that the Ukrainian government is literally asked him on 3 separate occasions to serve as the defense minister. Isn't that a bit of a conflict of interest, sir?
Well, if he would accept it,
yeah,
or even talk to him about that.
Well, apparently he talked to him.
Of course, he said he wouldn't. I think he said he wouldn't accept it, but you know, that's the way they co-opt our people in government. And he was certainly a ripe apple to do that. But this guy, boy, I'll tell you what, he'd be out of the Army yesterday if it was up to me, if I was still the commander that had the authority to do that. We don't need these people in government disrupting. A president who's probably one of our finest commander-in-chiefs, who's rebuilt the military, has reset our involvement in overseas extended wars that are unnecessary, and I just applaud him for doing that, because for me, I don't want to see one more body bag coming out of the Middle East of an American soldier.
I don't either, and I appreciate the fact he went to Afghanistan. Wasn't that great?
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, and they put out in Newsweek he was going to go play golf, and they finally fired the reporter that planted that story that he was going to be playing golf. And by darn, there he is over in Afghanistan having turkey with the troops.
Yes, and you know, I one thing about Trump that I think is different from Obama and even Bush is I really think that Trump loves our troops.
He does. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He keeps raising their salary. He tries to give them every kind of medical benefit available. I just really appreciate his help to the United States.
And to pardon those 3, we have another 8 to be pardoned yet. And then we had the Secretary of the Navy and an Admiral fighting, releasing Eddie Gallagher and just abusing that Navy SEALs family. Just horrible what some of these people still inside the Pentagon stand for. And President Trump had the courage to stand up and say, quit abusing this fine Navy SEAL and his family. It's over. And then, of course, he finally fired the Secretary of Navy, which was good. He needed to be. And he also needed to fire that Admiral, too. I think it was Admiral Green or something like that.
Yeah. I'm really glad that they were fired, because it sounded like the Navy Secretary was offering the defense, our Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, it sounded like he was offering him a bribe. And I really thought, wow, that's a quid pro quo, and I'm glad.
Well, it's insubordination. Right,
it is. What, you know, the Democrats point to Eddie Gallagher. Again, this is a guy in special forces, and he's been through hell several times. He's been over there several times.
9 deployments overseas. 9 deployments
right.
overseas.
It's incredible how many times he's, you know, seen his friends' blood and guts, right? And so talk about being traumatized over and over and over again. Nine times, you know, he's in and out of that hellhole. And, you know, the Democrats say, well, he committed a war crime by taking a picture of a terrorist, a dead terrorist with his head. And I'm thinking, why is that a war crime if he's dead?
Not.
It's not.
No.
Tell our audience why it's not.
What's a war crime?
Yeah, exactly. He's dead.
You know, you want to define it under Hitler, under Stalin. You can, but our troops are trained. We've had some renegades over the years, but for the most part, 99% plus of our troops follow the rules and regulations of their commanders and of the Army and Navy, Marines, and Air Force. I bailed and was very involved with the charges against Colonel Allen West in Iraq, and I went on national television. The next day, they pulled a potential court-martial against Colonel West for pulling a 45 off the ear of an apprehension. But we've had so many political correct officers develop in the Army over the last decade and a half that it's absolutely embarrassing. But anyhow, I have to go.
Okay.
I want to
thank you, sir, so much. You have a wonderful evening, and thank you for all your insight and input. We really appreciate it on the Denise Carey Show. Have a good night.
Thank you, Denise.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say Colonel Allen West is one of my favorites, and he's been on the show. In fact, I think he was on the show just last month. At any rate, excuse me. I think it's so important when a terrorist has just been killed, when somebody has tried to blow you and your friends up, and you're able to kill them before they kill you. Isn't that what it's all about, being on the battlefield, when you can kill someone before they kill you? And these terrorists are involved in killing men, women, and children, including infants. They blow up children's schools and schools for little girls, and they rape women, and they torture women to death, and on it goes. I mean, they're savages. And I don't know. I don't know how it's a war crime if somebody has been killed and you have a photograph taken. I mean, really. But let's talk about my two favorite advertisers. Ralph Frugaletti of Frugati's Restaurant here in Bakersfield, California. Guess what? If you're from out of Bakersfield, if you're living in Florida or New York or Washington, D.C., I don't care where you are in the country, Frugati's Restaurant continues to be voted number one. That's an Italian restaurant you need to visit right here in our area. So come to California, come to Kern County, come to Bakersfield, say hello to me. I often go there, Frugati's Restaurant on Coffee Road, and say hello to Ralph Frugaletti, an Italian-American who actually, for America, won an Olympic medal. And they've got the best food and a wonderful, wonderful ambiance there. I really want you to be sure and tell Ralph that you heard about his restaurant on the Denise Carey Show. And let's go to Anate's products.
President Trump has claimed security as national security, and in the Tehachapi Mountains of Kern County resides a United States defense contractor, Anate's Products. Here is the Silicon Valley of the aerospace industry, right here in East Kern. Anate's Products is a forward-leaning manufacturer and distributor of hardware sold to major defense and aerospace companies. We're talking about Boeing, Lockheed Martin, United Technologies, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon General Electric, and on the list goes, as well as to every United States ally worldwide, including Israel, America's most important strategic ally in the Middle East. And for everything that flies, Anate's Products is providing the parts. And with me today is the president of Anate's Products, Scott Baker. Hi, Scott.
How you doing?
Scott, tell us why you believe this corner of Kern County is the hub of the aerospace industry.
Well, this portion of Southern California here out in the Antelope Valley, it contains, some of the most cutting-edge technology going on in aviation today. We have some of the UCAS programs with unmanned technologies going on. We have Edwards Air Force Base out here, who's doing continual testing in their area. We have the Naval Weapons Station up there at China Lake, doing some fantastic cutting-edge stuff, cruise missile technology, and those things are going on. We have Scale Composites locally doing a lot of composite technology, which is new. We have SpaceX, which is a private one, putting a private entity putting things into space now. This area is the growth center for aviation's future, and this is the area I think that as a nation we need to be concentrating some of our effort and taking this technology. And as we all know, with the space program from Apollo years ago, out of these technologies, we the private sector are going to reap some of the benefits of that.
Thank you, Scott. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Baker, president of Anita's Products. Anita's Products, located in the beautiful mountains of Tehachapi, California, in eastern Kern County, is home to some of the most innovative and specialized technologies in the world, including those at the U.S. Naval Air Warfare Center Weapons Division at China Lake, Edwards Air Force Base, as well as Strata Launch, launching satellites capable of delivering multiple orbits in a single flight to space. And it is Anita's Products that has provided the manufactured devices, and the president, Scott Baker of Anita's Products, Marine Corps veteran, reactivated on 9/11 to monitor threats to the homeland, is carrying on a tradition of providing for the security of the United States by manufacturing every kind of fastener on anything that flies, as well as providing a full testing destructive laboratory. Contact Anita's Products, now in business for 30 years, at 661-822-6873. Located at 1314 Goodrich Drive in Tehachapi, for your manufacturing and testing needs today.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind all of you, it's December, and we're coming up at the end of the year, and tomorrow is Tuesday Giving, and I hope that all of you will work with me to help keep this broadcast on the air. Please make a tax-deductible contribution to the Middle East Initiative. You say, why not the Denise Carey Show? Because if you make a contribution to the Middle East Initiative, that is tax-deductible. The Middle East Initiative is my educational foundation. It's a 501c3 with, of course, its very own tax ID number. So when you make a contribution to the Middle East Initiative, it is tax deductible. So make a year-end contribution today. You can pull out that envelope and write the Middle East Initiative. On the envelope, you could put the Denise Carey Show. Send it to Post Office Box 82162. 82162, Bakersfield, California, 93380. And please help promote the broadcast. Share my broadcast out on my YouTube channel, The Denise Carey Show, on Facebook. Go to Twitter, The Denise Carey. Does it say Denise Carey Show? Is that the? I don't tweet myself, so I sometimes forget. So it's twitter.com, Denise, DENICE, Gary, GARY, Show. So Denise is always with a C. My mother, she took French, and she, wanted to name me after the city of Nice in France. So it's DENICE, Gary, GARY, Show. Please tweet out the show. Let your friends know all about it. We want to continue to build our audience. I also want to say to all my new audience on television there in Florida, I'm so glad you're joining the Denise Carey Show. If you're watching this broadcast in Florida or in some other state, please let me know. Send an email to the Denise Carey Show at gmail.com. Did I get that right, Mr. Producer? Mm-hmm. The Denise Carey Show at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have a question that you'd like addressed during the show, please send your question along and I'll be sure and address it. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you have a wonderful evening. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Good night.